What's going on?
I can feel the blood creeping up from the heathens. Got will, got fight, got pride, got reason. If they wanna go eat, then you know I'm gon' feed them. If you're coming for me, hope you're ready for a demon. I got eyes in the back of my head, I'm seeing. Take me for granted and you know I'm leaving. I'ma take what's mine with the webs I'm weaving. I could take this crowd from seeing to believing. Got a taste for blood and my tongue keeps bleeding. From the words I spit, so sharp, so freezing. So cold, the whole frostbite they feeling. I could tear you apart or I could go heal them. Don't believe in fate, don't believe in ceilings. I just need a taste and my mind starts peeling. I don't pace myself, I grind on kneeling. Got lust for change, I just love the feeling. I ain't gonna give up. Got too little time, I'ma live up. Head down, push forward through the tough times. Cause anything worth doing is a tough climb. I ain't gonna give up. Got too little time, I'ma live up. Head down, push forward through the tough times. Cause anything worth doing is a tough climb. Cause I'ma live life for the fight, yeah, I'm here to get it. I got drive, got sight, always have a vision. I go by at night, I be in my feelings. I'ma be fine, need time, and I'll soon be winning. I live life for the fight, yeah, I'm here to get it. I got drive, got sight, always have a vision. I go by at night, I be in my feelings. I'ma be fine, need time, and I'll soon be winning. I can feel the blood creeping up from the heathens. Got will, got fight, got pride, got reason. If they wanna go eat, then you know I'm gon' feed them. If you're coming for me, hope you're ready for a demon. I can feel the blood creeping up from the heathens. Got will, got fight, got pride, got reason. If they wanna go eat, then you know I'm gon' feed them. If you're coming for me, hope you're ready for a demon.
Yeah, I just looked down at the date, and we are a week and 2 days from Christmas Eve. I cannot believe how quickly this month is blown. This entire year, really. That's absolutely crazy. I guess I should start shopping here soon. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Dead Air Live on the Dead Air Full Spectrum channel. It is our Sunday night live show. Thank you all for joining us here in the chat. And we have an exciting show for you tonight, and we're going to be talking about, well, it's a paranormal show, Ken. We're talking about the Shadowman. Of course, a lot of people who do investigate. No,
not that one.
Not that one.
No. This is not a creepy pasta or Reddit creation.
No.
This is real life.
Yeah, actually, back in October, we did highlights on certain haunted locations. This month, it seems like it's just the stars are aligning, and we're doing highlights on serial killers and true crime, which we both Ken and I absolutely love getting into. And we've been very, very privileged with Amber just last week, and David Chavs. Is it Chavs or Chaves? Chavs. And of the FBI last week. If you haven't had a chance to check that out, make sure you guys do. And this week we are keeping in that same tone and topic, and we're thrilled to have this gentleman join us tonight. And Ken, how did we come about finding this individual?
One of our Patreon members, Gene, our guest, was kind enough to do a presentation for them in Scituate, Massachusetts, and Gene contacted me as we were discussing doing more of these type of things, and said, I know a guy, as they like to say. So looking into our guest credentials, I absolutely jumped at the opportunity to bring him in as soon as we had an opening in the schedule, because we've been pretty busy. So I think it's a wonderful transition that we're doing tonight, because this is kind of a series that we're running, and a lot of people are very interested in this from the perspective of behavioral science and investigation into these cases. So this is one I'm looking forward to tonight. I hope you all are as well.
That's right. And again, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Also, the thumbs up and the reminder bell for notification of upcoming content. We've been doing a lot more of these YouTube shorts since it seems to be very, very popular on some of the other platforms. Facebook is doing it, of course, TikTok, Instagram, and so we're throwing some of those out there as well. So we're always trying to come up with new ways to keep you guys engaged, and also utilize your time the most efficiently. Sometimes it's difficult to sit for 2 hours. But we always appreciate you guys coming and joining us. But we're giving you little snippets of some previous interviews that we've done, and we'll probably continue to do that here in the future as well. We are simulcast with KGRADB.com, KGRA on Facebook, Global Radio Live on, I guess it's X now, isn't it?
Yeah, whatever those crazy kids are calling it these days.
Yeah. Here on YouTube, if you're listening through KGRA, you can find us at Dead Air Nation. Our Facebook page is Dead Air Full Spectrum. Again, on X, Dead_Spectrum. And our fun place, we call it, which is the Patreon page, where we do town halls each and every Monday night with our Patreon members. Everybody on screen just jabbing it up, talking about different things. So, you guys are more than welcome to join. $3, $3 membership. And we'd love to have you come on board, hear about your experiences, your ideas, and any jokes that you may bring to the table also. We got a good sense of humor crowd. So please feel free to register for that on Patreon. But yep. Next week, real quick, we're going to do a little bit of a holiday gathering. Isn't that correct, Ken?
Yeah, what we're going to be doing next Sunday is bringing on all our on-air talent. So George and I will be joined by Carrie and Erin for Well, That Was Weird, Cody and Satori from Live with Cody and Satori, and hopefully Melissa St. Hilaire will be joining us from Los Angeles. So depending on her schedule, we'll sort of have a Dead Air Christmas. Sounds fun.
Okay. I wanted to make a quick announcement also that we probably will not be speaking about drones anywhere along the East Coast of the United States or inland because of people either panicking, being fearful. It's just we don't know enough about what's going on yet, so we're just continuing along. Ken and I have had some discussions, but again, we're just going to move it along here and let the chips fall where they may with regards to this. So, but I know it's
not unless we get a flyby here somewhere inside our homes. It's
which is possible.
I decided I'm just going to leave mine in the basement for now. Why add to the chaos at this point?
It's not worth it. It's not worth it.
No.
People are very unpredictable in circumstances like this. So, yeah, we're staying away from it. You can come to your own conclusions if you already have. Continue to watch, whether it's mainstream media or social media. Everybody's got an interest in what is happening and an opinion on what is happening. But bottom line of it, we really don't know what's going on. I don't know. While Cheryl Plum said tomorrow should be interesting, that's kind of scary.
Stay off the internet too, except if you're watching this show.
That's the only safe spot right now. Only safe spot
to get actual information from.
Yep. Let's not dilly-dally any further. Ken, they've made all the announcement we need to. Let's bring our guest on for tonight.
It would be my pleasure. Ron Franscell is the author of 19 books, including the Edgar-nominated Morgue, A Life and Death, and international bestseller, The Darkest Night, a true crime memoir hailed by Anne Rule and Vincent Bugliosi as a direct descendant of Truman Capote's In Cold Blood, and listed by the New York Times as one of America's most powerful true crime books. His atmospheric and muscular writing has established him as one of the most provocative voices in narrative nonfiction. Shadowman, an elusive psycho killer and the birth of FBI profiling, is the chilling true story of a serial killer in a small Montana town and the frustrated FBI agents who have run out of leads. until fellow agents suggest an untried new forensic tool they call criminal profiling. So we're looking forward to this conversation to learn a little bit more about the process and talk to somebody who has done a depth of research on the topic. So without further ado, please welcome to Dead Air, Mr. Ron Franscell.
Thank you, Ken, George. I'm delighted to be here, especially after I heard that. I heard your intro of me, and I don't really recognize that guy. But you've got a rockin' intro yourself.
Let me check it again.
My hat's off to you.
Yeah, that's you.
Yeah.
That's you.
Oh, they say.
Well, welcome. We appreciate your time
Glad
tonight.
to be here.
And this is going to be pretty fascinating because this was not a particular case, and of course, we'll focus some of our time on this particular case because it has significance in the field of behavioral science. But there's so much else to get into. So again, pleasure having you here.
Well, I'm glad to be here. This is a very interesting true crime story. I was shocked when I first came across it years ago. That I didn't know anything about it. And, when I came back to it as a book project, it was interesting to me that even my true crime colleagues, when I asked, had no recollection of this crime, no information. Somehow it slipped under the radar, and I have a few theories about that. But it was interesting to come back 50 years after and write not only about the crime and its effect on this small town and the people involved, but this moment of historic importance to forensics.
No, absolutely. Yes, there are.
Now, a question for you is, where are you residing right now? How does a story such as this, from a time frame so long ago, intermixed with so many other serial killers in that same era, come to your feet? How did this all come about?
Right now, I live in New Mexico, but I grew up in Wyoming, and I was a senior writer for the Denver Post, covering the evolution of the American West. So I spent a lot of time in Montana and Idaho and Colorado and everywhere else west of the Mississippi, doing stories. And that's how I first came across this story. It wasn't until years later, when I was a full-time writer, that I went back to it and dove more deeply into it. And so a lot of my work involves going to the place. I'm an old school journalist. I believe standing there, being there, is important to telling the story. Some of that comes through, I think, in Shadowman. I spent probably 5 or 6 weeks in Manhattan, Montana, in Gallatin County, out near Bozeman, during my research. And during that time, I'm absorbing all the atmospheric details about this small place. And like I say, I hope some of that found a way into the atmosphere of the book too. Let me comment on one thing you said, though. We're talking about serial killers,
Yes.
and in this case, a serial killer. However, at the time, 1973 and 1974, the phrase serial killer hadn't yet been coined. They were called various things, mass killers, chain killers, but the term serial killer doesn't come up until later in the 70s, after Ted Bundy. So that's another fascinating element of this.
Yeah.
And possibly contributes to how it came in under the radar. That we don't necessarily associate this as a serial killer story, simply because there were no serial killers at the moment, at least by name. We had serial killers. We've had serial killers probably since the dawn of mankind, but
no question.
It's that part of it is an interesting element.
Yeah, in going back, it's probably worth mentioning that a lot of times we associate these type of things with sprawling urban areas.
Yes.
Where someone can assimilate into the population and really hide in plain sight. Not the case all the time, because I'm sure, like, give us a little bit of a travelogue, Ron, on Manhattan, Montana, and your impressions when you're setting foot in there. What kind of town this is, because it would seem to me it's one of those places that, well, it can't happen here.
Absolutely. And frankly, there are more of those places than the other. Most places don't assume it could happen here until it does. Manhattan is a town, at the time of this crime, is a town of less than 1,000 people. It's quiet. It's, I would say, typical. I grew up in Wyoming. I knew those kinds of towns. That served me well doing the research there. But it was a quiet little town. There were a couple of deaths in the county in years before. A Boy Scout at a camporee in a state park was stabbed and bludgeoned and died from that. It was chalked up to horseplay among the boys at night. A year after that, a little boy was climbing on a bridge and was shot, and that was attributed to just a stray shot from a rabbit hunter or a target shooter or something. And so by the time 1973 rolls around, and in the state park, Headwaters State Park in Montana, a little Michigan tourist girl goes missing. The notion doesn't immediately default to we have a killer among us, because it just doesn't happen here. And as that story unfolds, obviously something far more nefarious is going on here than a little girl wandered off.
Yeah, let's give the framework for exactly what it is. This is 7-year-old Susie Marie Jaeger, and she was out camping with her family. And sometime during the night, this is a shot, someone had sliced the tent open, and you can see in the lower right-hand side of the tent the access point. And the little girl was taken from there. And a very large manhunt took place after that. And why exactly now were the feds called into this, Ron?
Well, that's an interesting question. You aren't old enough to remember, and neither am I, the abduction of the famous Charles Lindbergh's baby back in the 1930s.
Yeah.
And Lindbergh, of course, had a transatlantic pilot, was one of the great celebrities of his time. His child, this little boy, was kidnapped, and it was in a New Jersey area, but the police there were overwhelmed, and the delays caused by being overwhelmed, the lack of resources, and of course the celebrity of Charles Lindbergh himself, caused the Congress to take up and pass a law that says whenever a child is involved in a case of kidnapping,
right.
The FBI has to get immediately involved within 24 hours or so. It was a nod to Lindbergh, of course, but that was a story that dominated the headlines, much like drones are dominating our headlines now. So by 1973, a little girl in a state park goes missing. The FBI is going to be called. As it happens, the FBI agent for that district came from a family that had actually donated the land on which this park sat. So,
this is Dunbar, right?
Yeah, Pete Dunbar was his name, and he'd been all around. He had been in New York, I believe he'd been in Washington D.C. He was a very accomplished and respected FBI agent, but his parents had become ill, and he asked to be sent back to Montana to be near them to take care of them.
Mm-hmm.
So he happens to be the agent who gets assigned with his partner to this case after a young deputy goes out and sees the scene. The scene consists of that tent that you showed with a half moon cut through which little Susie had been dragged out. She had three brothers and a sister also in the tent. I'm sorry, two brothers and a sister also in the tent when that happened. That tells you something about the stealth of the kidnapper. You can see in that picture, sort of just below the flap of the tent, what looks like a stuffed animal. It was her favorite stuffed animal. The deputy who showed up first noticed footprints trailing off through the grass in the dew, but within an hour or two, the sun coming up, they disappeared. That was the evidence they had. They had no other evidence, no fingerprints, no witnesses,
Right.
Nothing. They had nothing to go on, not even ultimately those footprints, except the report that they wandered off in the direction of the parking lot next to this park.
Yeah, the immediate impression I get, and I don't know, maybe you got some insight in this, but cutting that particular part of the tent is either just it could have been any one of the kids and just being random, or he was observing them somehow and knew that particular little girl would be the closest to it. See, I mean, I'm not sure if anybody had that information, like, why did you choose that particular victim? It was just completely random, and, I'm going to go in, the kids are there, because it seems to me, if a parent was there, he probably wouldn't have tried that. So somewhere along the line, it seems to me that he was observing, and there was some premeditation here, possibly.
Yes, and we should talk about that. I think that comes up in the profiling part, but the premeditation, we sometimes want to think about that as a planning that goes on for days or months. It can be minutes. The other thing, and I don't know if that picture, I should know, but I don't know if that picture shows that the parents are in that trailer sleeping about where the photographer is shooting this picture. The grandparents and an older brother are arrayed. So they're basically encircling this tent. off to the right side of that tent, a few yards away, are other campers, not related to the Jaegers, but other campers who are in this park at this time. So while I wouldn't say it was crowded, there were plenty of people, and they were all around this tent. So that tells us also, and told the ultimate profilers, here's a person who has certain qualities that are factoring in here, and we'll talk about that, I'm sure.
Yeah.
But it's an interesting element that just that picture you showed right there suggests somebody in the dark, no lights, no flashlight, no nothing, comes up and does that, grabs a child and escapes with that child, with nobody hearing. Nobody heard a thing. Nobody saw a thing. The child, in my mind, I know children, they're wiggly. And I'd imagine a frightened little 7-year-old would be squirming and trying to get out of the grasp of this stranger. So there are all kinds of interesting questions that arise when you see just that. And that's what they were faced with. The largest manhunt in Montana history unfolded over the next couple of weeks. But when it was done, they knew nothing more than when they started.
Yeah, the stealth in which it was done and the idea of getting away as quickly as he did, one has to assume that there was a vehicle nearby or something like that. But this particular case started to take a turn because, as it turned out, they started to tie this particular event to other incidents in and around Bozeman and Manhattan. And maybe, Ron, you can kind of run down, from left to right. Of course, there's Susie in the middle, but we have a young man over there. I believe his last name was Polar.
Yeah, and that was the little boy that was shot on the bridge.
Right, you referred to that.
In 5 or 6 years earlier. So that's how long between these kinds of crimes there was in Montana. It just didn't happen. The young woman on the far right is Sandra Smulligan. She's 19 years old. She grew up in Manhattan, was a waitress in the cafe there. One night in February of 1974, roughly 8 or 9 months after Susie Jaeger disappeared, Sandra Smulligan disappears. And there's no explanation. There's no physical evidence at her apartment. There's again very little to go on. At this point, the FBI isn't involved except as somebody who's, basically interested in anything that goes on there. Sure. It's mainly a sheriff's case. So the sheriff mounts a big search for Sandra. That search reaches out miles and miles. One deputy and the night marshal of Manhattan, the night marshal being the one cop employed by this little town, were and basically existed to roust, teenagers that were out making out and
doing,
they were assigned to a distant part of the county, a remote part of the county. They would knock on doors of ranches and generally search around. They came to an abandoned ranch, the Lockhart Ranch, and went in and walked around. The abandoned ranch house itself had been used by cowboys as a kind of line shack, and there was a barn there that was all locked up. And they were about to wrap up that little bit of their search when they found some new young woman's underwear in the grass. It's winter now. They're far out there, but that causes them to want to look a little bit closer. So they kind of bust into that locked up barn where they find kind of camouflaged Sandra Smulligan's car, which had been hidden there. Now we have a break. They call in reinforcements. Everybody piles out there. Word spreads around the town. Pretty soon, sheriff deputies are crawling all over the place. Sadly, among the things they notice are bits of bone that have been scattered around, and when they turn their attention to that, they begin collecting small shards of bone and then a little bit bigger pieces, and this is chilling. They assume that this is what's become of Sandra. This is a picture of a deputy pointing at the burn pit near the house. They collect these grisly bones, and there's really very little at their disposal, but the FBI comes to the rescue and says, hey, let's get this studied by the experts back east. And they send it to the Smithsonian. Very soon, the Smithsonian comes back and identifies some of the larger bits that they had found as having belonged to a young woman, 18 to 21 years old. And they are convinced it's probably Sandra Smulligan. But wait, because among those bones you sent us here at the Smithsonian, the scientist said, there are bones of a much younger female, under 10 years old, that don't belong to the older girl. So there are two sets of shards in here. Mm-hmm. At that point, they assume that the remains of the younger girl were probably Susie Jaeger's, and that they were basically crushed. They were pulverized, burned and pulverized and scattered to the winds, literally. Mm-hmm. So now they have that. They believe that Susie's dead. They believe that Sandra's dead. But that's all they have. Again, we have no witnesses. We have bodies now, so to speak, but we have no weapons. We have no suspects. We have no witnesses. We have nothing.
Right.
And here we are 9 months after Susie died, or disappeared and likely died. And the FBI is frustrated. Pete Dunbar is frustrated that he doesn't have more on this. Later that spring, he has to take his regular training at the new training academy in Quantico, Virginia. And he goes back there where they go through a variety of new skill sets and updating their training. But he sits in on a workshop by two agents. One of them, a guy named Pat Mullany, who's a criminal psychology expert. The other, a guy named Howard Teten on the left, who is an expert, an acknowledged expert within the FBI at crime scene investigation, at what you should be looking at. These two guys had gotten together a couple years before, when they were both separately teaching their classes at the academy, and they had this idea that what if we could extract some detail about the bad guy from just what we could see at the scene, nothing else, just the evidence at the scene. Could we tell enough about the bad guy in order to limit the pool? The pool up to that moment is everybody.
Yeah.
How much time are we going to spend investigating everybody? How do we reduce that pool to likelier suspects?
I think, Ron, to just interrupt for a second, it's probably worth mentioning that this particular idea was not fully accepted yet.
It wasn't.
It was in its infancy, and I think Agent Dunbar was maybe kind of taking a chance based on the frustration you referred to. It's like kind of like when people like claim that, you know, at the end of the rope they hit a roadblock, you know, police will consult a psychic or something like that.
Right.
More psychics claim that they've been contacted than the police would ever say. But it seems as though, if memory serves me, Dunbar is just kind of like, hey, I'll try anything at this point, even something that's not widely accepted in the Bureau.
Dunbar didn't believe in it. And that's partly because J. Edgar Hoover himself didn't believe in it. J. Edgar Hoover himself thought this was hokum. He thought it was black magic. He didn't like it. Fact is, just less than 2 years before the Sandy Smulligan case, Hoover died. And a little more progressive leadership came in at the FBI, just progressive enough to give Teten and Mullany a little bit longer leash. So this workshop that Dunbar happened to sit in on was among the first that they had been allowed to do to present this idea of criminal profiling.
Mm-hmm.
The FBI still didn't truly believe in it, and Dunbar didn't truly believe in it. The belief by Hoover and many others was that shoe leather, knocking on doors, solved cases, not voodoo. Let me add that even today, that attitude exists. So, not just at the FBI, but all across law enforcement. I think
that's how they're trained. You know, everything is trace evidence, DNA now, which didn't exist then. Fingerprints, you know, physical, forensic evidence. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
I wanted to jump in here real quick from the chat aspect. Very important. I wanted to just get into this, that there were a couple of questions about how this girl was taken from this tent, and I'm not throwing in too much of a spoiler, but the killer confessed that when he cut the hole in the side, how he figured out who was where, no idea, but how he was able to subdue her was that he reached in around her neck and choked her out unconscious.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's why she didn't struggle. That's why she didn't make any noise. And he was able to quietly carry her from the tent and from the camping grounds. So just to answer that question for you guys there in chat. So he just reached in and squeezed her neck until she was unconscious. Didn't kill her then, but definitely was able to subdue her and take her away quietly. Sorry to interrupt.
No, didn't interrupt at all. So Dunbar, at this workshop, as the workshop broke up, Dunbar followed Teten and Mullany back to their offices in the basement and said, I have this case. And he confessed his frustration. They hadn't yet ever created a criminal profile. But they said, well, this is out in the middle of nowhere. It's kind of a low risk if we fail. It's not Charles Lindbergh. Let's just try. Teten and Mullany had done a little bit of interviewing of killers at that point. One of the biggest, they would be out in California or in New York, and they would just drop in at the prison and kind of cajole their way into letting them do an interview. So there were a few interviews, but not many. And they were just basing this on kind of logic, what they knew about crime scenes, what they learned in their careers about psychology and crime scenes. And so that first profile really starts with about 15 or 16 elements. They later expanded by 2 or 3 as they learn more, as Dunbar's investigation continues. But some of it is they're just going with the odds. They're kind of I won't say guessing, but they're saying, for example, probably done by a young Caucasian male in his mid to late 20s. Well, today we know that's pretty right on. At that time, they didn't. There was no study that said that, but they said it, and partly for a variety of reasons, but that turned out to be true. But some of the stuff was really more deductive, and I think that there was more Sherlock in it than guessing. So,
right.
And we can go into all of that, but
I mean, because I think I had read a little bit of it, Ron, not to the depth you have at all, but it was something along the lines he had to be in good physical condition.
Yeah.
He was very stealthy, so they might assume some military background, or I mean, I understand they're spitballing to some degree.
In the end, of those 18 or 19 items that they had on their profile, once the dust had cleared and this case was in the books, we can go back and look at it and see they were right on all but one. And that one, there's no answer.
Right.
There's one that we've been unable to answer. So rather than say they were wrong, it's not clear that they were wrong. In fact, they might be right, but we just don't know, and we'll probably never know. But for the first time out of the box, with no rules, no idea of how this is done, they did pretty well. Could they have done more? Well, yeah, nowadays we've perfected that. But back then they had no idea. They were pioneers. And it fascinated me. Not that they said he was a young male in his teens or 20s, but or late mid to late 20s, but other things like the prediction that he would likely save body parts. Now, where did that come from?
Yeah, because those kind of things, it's not unusual for a serial killer to take trophies, correct?
That's correct, but again, we know that now partly because of our proliferating media, and because of the rise of profiling and profiling on TV, and we now know a lot about serial killers from that. Back then, we didn't have that. We didn't have serial killers, so had they seen elements of taking souvenirs? It probably had. I'm looking at what's another. They deduced that he would probably try to contact the family.
Ooh.
And the reason they said that, and I'm sort of compressing their thinking here.
Yeah.
That was that the abduction of Susie was a very intimate act to him, and that in a way he was family. In a way, they were connected. They had a relationship, and therefore he would have a relationship with her family too. And so that was one element that underlay the idea that he would try to contact the family, which he did, and which handled by the mother completely.
Let's talk about that.
That is amazing work. But without her, this case would have probably just died right there. She kept the caller on the phone, talked to him. By the end of the conversation, he was crying. But there was a lot of information that the profilers took from that call and added to their profile, and actually added some very important elements. So. But let's the first time he calls and there's a second, that's about all they can do. They still haven't zeroed in on him, only his type. And among the things was that this was likely somebody who was born in that area and grew up in that area. Probably generally known to people, generally regarded as odd. It was asocial, likely had military experience, had likely killed before. Likely worked in a job that was solitary, that didn't put him among other people, that he didn't deal well with those people, so he would work by himself. So there were all these elements that they're pulling out of their original profile and then that first conversation, but they haven't zeroed in on who this guy might be.
Right. And I'm going to jump in real quick for our audience, just to put a finer point on this. So profilers say that there is probably going to be a connection with he and this little girl, and therefore will result in the desire to connect with the family. He will probably try to contact the family. He ends up contacting the family. Now, that is either a remarkable insight or the luckiest shot in the dark ever, but they called it. So just to, before we move on from that, to let everybody know how incredible that is, how remarkable that insight was. at that point. And if you want to pick it up, Ron, as far as when the mom was contacted and how this all sort of evolved into, a resolution of some type.
Well, what that knowledge gave them, or what that presumed knowledge gave them, was a forewarning. We should at least record, if not tap, these phones. And so the conversations between the killer and the mother, we have a record of. They're in the book verbatim. So we have those conversations. It gives them more information, but once again, no witnesses. We don't have a weapon. We don't have. There's really very little until a rancher out in Gallatin County, Montana, notices a phone call on his bill that he didn't make. And he reports it to the phone company. The phone company recognizes the number as one that they are supposed to be watching for, the number of the family. And the FBI immediately swings into action, basically discovers that the killer has tapped into a party line out in remote rural Montana to make this call. What they do learn from that is a couple of things. They see tire tracks parked underneath a low slung line that was likely used. But they also say this guy might have communications experience. So all of a sudden they now have another thing to look at with who ultimately becomes a suspect. As they, a lot of things are happening here and we don't have all night, but a couple of people rise up. One of them is a local carpenter, a guy named David Meyerhofer, who is fingered by people. Meyerhofer mainly comes up because he had dated Sandy Smulligan one time, and she just thought he was weird, so she just refused to date him again. He sent chocolates and flowers, but she just was having none of it. He happened to live in a little apartment, a little garage, actually. He owned the garage that was less than a half block from her apartment, which happened to be over the store that his father owned in Little Manhattan, Montana. So the FBI convinced him to go in for a lie detector test, which he passed with flying colors. There was no indication of any deception whatsoever. And so Dunbar dismissed him. Plus, he was a clean-cut Marine, ex-Marine, I should say former Marine, who spoke well, was friendly, even wanted to help. In fact, he had shown up while they were searching out there at the Lockhart Ranch and brought to them some things that he thought they might be interested in. So he was a very helpful guy. He was known to the cops as just a kid who, just a goofy kid who was well-spoken, smart, never been in trouble whatsoever. And his father was the biggest businessman in town. One thing leads to another. The profilers aren't as convinced about Meyerhofer as Dunbar is. Ultimately, he takes a second lie detector test, all by FBI experts, and again passes with flying colors. Ultimately, running ahead here, he takes a truth serum test at the state mental hospital, which he passes with flying colors. Dunbar is done. Dunbar is pissed that the profilers keep coming back and saying, no, this guy really needs to be looked at. And Dunbar, remember, didn't believe in them, but they stayed on it. And ultimately, that remember that phone call on that low slung line, they're able to trace that back to a motel room in Salt Lake City. Dunbar at first thinks, well, this is impossible because we had Meyerhofer under surveillance during that time. So we know he wasn't in Salt Lake City. What they discover is that they didn't have Meyerhofer under surveillance as closely as they thought. And now there's serious belief that Meyerhofer is their guy. And when a final call comes to the family residence, the killer puts on a little girl on the phone, and the little girl supposedly is Susie. The mom knows it's not Susie, but it just doesn't sound like her. But what it does is it causes the FBI to be concerned that he has another child. And they can't wait any longer. So they move in and they arrest David Meyerhofer.
It's a perfect spot to stop. We are at the top of the hour. We have to take our break. And when we continue on the other side, you guys are not going to believe how this all turns out. But it's an amazing story that you guys definitely have to check out. And again, we'll be putting up his website and also his Facebook page. But Shadowman, an elusive psycho killer and the birth of FBI profiling, Ron Franscell will be joining us again in the second hour. Stay with us. You're watching Dead or Alive on the Dead or Full Spectrum channel. We'll be back right after our break.
Hey members, the new KGRA DB app is now available on iOS and Android devices. Gain on-demand access to any KGRA DB programming. Download any show directly to your mobile device to listen or watch on the go. Go to the App Store and search KGRA DB.
As UFO reports come in from around the world, the Mutual UFO Network, MUFON, is there. We continue to explore new cases and build our massive database. We share our information with the world in a number of ways. If you would like to be part of our investigative team, you are always welcome. What could be more exciting than exploring the UFO question firsthand? Join MUFON, find your friends.
You're listening to the KGRA Digital Broadcasting Network. We provide unparalleled coverage of trending news in the world of ufology, cryptozoology, and paranormal phenomenon. Whether you're watching our video live stream or listening to one of our audio programs, you are getting the best from world-renowned researchers and hosts, guiding you through topics the mainstream won't touch. Miss one of your favorite programs? No problem. Head over to the members area at kgradb.com for access to our massive library of award-winning content. Make contact, stay connected, only at kgradb.com.
And yes, you guys also can subscribe to our Patreon account, all of our wonderful Patreon members on the screen right now, and more to come. Town Hall tomorrow night, 8 p.m. You never know what we're going to be talking about topically. Sometimes some of our Patreon members will go out and do investigations. They want to present the evidence, to which Ken and I will, to the best of our ability, agree with them, unless we want to rip them apart. So we'll try to stay away from that.
Until we don't.
Yeah. So again, maybe the question has never been answered as to why on a paranormal channel are we talking about true crime? Because Ken and I have both said many a time, and we still agree, the scariest part about ghost hunting is the living. And this gives you an idea of just how terrifying that it could be out there in the world. And I don't mean the world of paranormal, just the world in general. Time to bring our guest right now. Again, we've got Franscell joining us this evening. He is the author of this incredible book with an incredible story behind it. You guys definitely have to check out Shadowman, an elusive psycho killer, and the birth of FBI profiling, how it goes hand in hand. And I'll tell you what, Ron, again, this is a fascinating story. It is something that is not easy to get into. Describe for us just very, very quickly, as you're writing this book and doing the research, how difficult it is to deal with the horror of what transpired, what happened to these young children, what happened to this young woman, 19-year-old woman, and how you had to deal with it from the perspective of a writer.
Well, I've been a journalist all my life. It seems I started working on the school paper in 7th grade and ended up at the Denver Post. Like I said, covered the beginnings of the terror war after 9/11. One thing that journalists like medical examiners or cops, doctors learn is a kind of compartmentalization. In your mind, you have to set aside some of that horror over here, and it belongs in this little box, and that's where you deal with it. You don't give in to the urge to cry or to vomit or to walk away, because I have a story to tell, and that's my job. It's just like a cop has a case to solve, and a morgue or a medical examiner has to come to some conclusions. It's it's difficult. I wrote about that at my own blog at ronfranscell.com under an essay called Cry Later, because that's what you tell yourself. I'll cry later. This particular story is grim. What happens to a 7-year-old girl, a 19-year-old woman? It's just particularly grisly. But we can't tell the story about David Meyerhofer or people like him without telling what they are capable of. And they are capable of this kind of horror. So we can't shy away from it. I won't say I toned it down, but I will say that the grisliness was bigger and wider than I could have fit into this book. So I have to find a way to summarize it in a way that you can consume it and not throw the book across the room.
Yeah. Well, I think that it's there's a couple of elements here, and it's not a glorification of the perpetrator at all, but in another part, it's memorializing the victims and giving them a voice, so to speak, post-mortem, but also delving into the evolution of law enforcement. And we probably will never know exactly how many lives have been saved to be able to profile some of these people and give people a sort of early alert and make them aware of patterns of behavior that they may have to change to avoid these kind of things.
Right. Shortly before David Meyerhofer was arrested, Susie Jaeger's mother met with him face to face in Montana and sat there and talked to him. And he was more agitated by that than she was. And it was her phone call conversations, that face-to-face meeting that led ultimately to the FBI and the profilers being certain they had the right guy. So telling the story of how evil he could be requires me to tell her heroic story as well. So the greater the evil, the greater the hero. And she plays a big role in this book. And I'm proud to say I know her. She's still alive. She's, I believe, in her 90s now. She's still alive. That's what I'll say about her for now. But there is something that you should remind me to say later.
Yeah.
One of the profile elements that came up that's important to know at this moment, it was the last element. And the last element was that that the unknown subject, who we now believe is David Meyerhofer, when he's arrested, he will try to commit suicide, or he might try to do damage to the cops. He might try to kill them or catch them in a crossfire. So he's arrested. He's taken to the little jailhouse in Bozeman, Montana. He's stashed in there while a bunch of deputies go and search his little converted garage where he lived. There they find his Bible. They find some other little girl trinkets that he doesn't have a little girl or a little sister or anything. They find clippings about some of the cases that they've been looking at. They find a calendar marked on very curious dates that align with crimes. And to their horror, They find in his freezer packages containing a human hand, and some fingers, and then some ground meat. The hand and fingers were fingerprinted and proved to be Sandra Smulligan's. The packages, before DNA, were just determined to contain human flesh. So all of the profiler's predictions were starting to come true. All they had to do was make the case. By this time, Meyerhofer has a lawyer. The lawyer comes, and he's shown that hand, that frozen hand, and he vomits in the front yard. He immediately goes back to Meyerhofer in jail and reads him the riot act, and he's very angry. And he tells Meyerhofer, "You're as good as executed. They've got this stuff that's going to put you on death row for sure." Meyerhofer said, would they take the death penalty off the table if I gave them something else? The proposal was made to the prosecutor, and the agreement was that they would not seek the death penalty if Meyerhofer could prove what he said. And what he said was he had killed at least 2 others in Gallatin County, Montana. Remember that little Boy Scout in the tent years before? Remember the boy that was shot off the bridge a few years before? All done by Meyerhofer. And so in an overnight confession interrogation, he described the details of those 2 crimes, of Susie Jaeger and of Sandy Smulligan's deaths, and what he had done. And again, it's grim. The conversation, the interrogation is in the book, again, verbatim. And it shakes you up. It shook me up, and I do this for a living. So at the end of the evening, around 4 o'clock in the morning, they determined that everybody had been up for about 2 days. We'll pick this up again sometime in the next day, and we have many more questions. You can see that in the interrogation. They kind of tiptoe up to certain topics and then say, okay, well, we can come back to that. Meyerhofer is taken back to his cell. About 10 o'clock the next morning, the jailer finds him hanged in his cell. Epstein style.
Did that make sense to you, Ron? Not to be a conspiracy theorist on all of this, but it seems to me if the guy was trying to, cop a plea and give them something more because he was worried about the death penalty, unless he had a change of heart or something like that, does it make sense to you?
Yes.
Okay.
David Meyerhofer was a sadist, and sadists have they're power and control freaks. Their ultimate power is seizing control. David Meyerhofer had lost control. He now did what they needed him to do.
Mm-hmm.
By committing suicide, he took control back. He did the one thing that frustrated all of their efforts. David Meyerhofer took control back. He left all these questions unanswered. He confessed to 4 murders in Gallatin County because that's where he had a deal on the death penalty. He didn't confess to all the murders he did. And to this day, profilers back then, Teten and Mullany, profilers today, all who are familiar with this case, not a single one of them believes he didn't kill others.
Interesting the way that you address that with him and that control factor. And I don't want to spoil this for anyone that's watching tonight or plans to watch this show, but there's a Hulu series, Wild Crime 11 Skulls. And this gentleman, Israel Keys, same situation, got caught, was confessing, was sitting regularly with the police, talking about all of his murders. 11 Skulls was something that he drew in his cell. Committed suicide, slit his wrists in prison. So you might have the absolute answer to it that now I don't have that control anymore. What's the point of living? It's got to be some sort of a psychological rush for them. And once it's gone, it's almost somebody on heroin that's coming off of it. It's got to be too much for them to stand.
Well, I think so. And it isn't, the one adjustment I would make to your comment is that this wasn't a moment to him that was, I have nothing else to do. There wasn't desperation in it. It was a plan.
Yeah.
It was something that he did. Now, why would he make an agreement to escape the death penalty? Well, one thing that was happening was that a team from the Marine Corps was flying in the next couple of days to interview him about some interesting cases that were part of his Vietnam service, where he was stationed in a camp that was that was bordered on one side by an orphanage that regularly lost children. Now, it's in a war zone, so children run off. Children are abducted by the Viet Cong. They're going to disappear for a lot of reasons. Maybe their families came back, but they could also disappear because there's a child serial killer in camp next door. So the Marines wanted to question him about that. He wanted to live off base at Pendleton, which he did for about a year. Among the things they found in his apartment were kiddie tickets to Disneyland.
Yeah.
Unused. So there's a chance that there are dozens, but there are at least more than the 4 he confessed to committing.
I would suppose that the only downside to this is that the behavioral science unit, unlike future perpetrators, did not get that opportunity to interview him at length, because that could have helped them avoid this kind of thing in the future, with a child predator at the time, because as we've said time and again, this was essentially still in its infancy. They hadn't talked to Kemper and Manson.
They had talked to Kemper. They had talked to, oddly enough, and Kemper loomed large in their early profiling theories. There was a bigger sexual component than probably in reality there is.
Ron, give me just for my edification, give me a year on Kemper.
Late 60s, early 70s, I think. Yeah, he's in prison at the time they're kind of wandering around.
Right.
But what's interesting that I told you to bring up, and I'll bring it up. Susie's mother went on to become one of the more vocal and touching and moving advocates against the death penalty that we have in America today. and she toured the country for decades, giving speeches in churches and Rotary clubs and you name it, about the death penalty. She was an ardent, very religious Catholic, and she didn't believe that she believed that Susie's heart was so pure that Susie wouldn't want a death on her hands. But she's much more eloquent than I am about that, and I am fascinated when I get a chance to talk to her, partly because my very first true crime book was about the abduction, rape, and murder of two young girls that lived next door to me in Wyoming.
Right.
Literally the girls next door. One died, one survived, and their killers and rapists were sentenced to die, but were commuted during the whole issue over the death penalty in the 70s. So I tend to respect the death penalty, but talking with Susie's mother and listening to her, if anybody could convince me otherwise, she's it. She's just the most wonderful, pure person. But this case doesn't get solved without her.
Yeah.
I don't agree with her. I'm sorry, but if it were my child, you're not imagining what that poor child went through, and by all aspects, Susie got off easy in the sense that apparently, according to FBI, that she wasn't, and his confession, she wasn't sexually molested. There was no sort of activity regards to that. She was strangled. But there are so many other victims out there that go through some horrendous torture prior to passing, and those individuals are not worth the oxygen that they suck in, as far as I'm concerned.
You would think. And with the advent of DNA, if we can prove beyond a shadow of a doubt,
correct,
that makes an execution more likely. But we're seeing more and more the arguments are going off. I didn't do it to I did it, but there's a reason.
Yeah, my psychological issues and
whatever. Yeah, whatever. So it's fascinating that way, and again, that's my privilege as the storyteller, to meet these people and to talk to them. That also means I sit with killers and talk to them. It's not necessarily a privilege, but it expands my view of the story.
Mm-hmm. I think it's probably worth mentioning that Marietta is actually Susie's mother's name.
Marietta.
She's not unique in as much as someone who has lost someone close to them, arguing against the death penalty. For that person, it's just something in their heart where they don't allow revenge and vindication to kind of eat them up alive. So exactly. I'm not taking a position on it one way or the other. I'm just saying that for some people, that is important for them to come to grips with it, have some type of closure, whatever that may be. I don't know if it never ends.
Yeah, I don't like the word closure, as a matter of fact, because it doesn't close anything.
It doesn't.
But the things that we often call closure are just answers to questions. So what we're getting is not closure, but a better understanding of what happened. And sometimes that gives us peace. Sometimes it doesn't.
Sometimes it doesn't. Yeah. What? Let me ask you this, Ron. Okay, in your research, you said you've spoken to some of these perpetrators. What do you take away from the, you know, from the psychology of these people? And because there's some common denominators and in others there's not, but we've heard so much about their environment, their upbringing, and all the rest of it. So
Yes.
what do you take away and for your own profile, for lack of a better term?
When I have the opportunity to interview a killer in one of the books that I've written, and I've done that a few times, I've learned there are common denominators. Think about these are all, not all. The kinds of people I'm generally writing about are the socio and psychopaths. They've got something else going on. This isn't a husband coming home at one night and putting his wife out of her misery, or a wife coming home putting her husband out of his misery in a fit of passion. These are people who have something seriously sick going on. What I've learned over a couple decades of doing this is that their sociopathic tendencies make them master manipulators.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody is a victim of their manipulation. Everybody can provide something they want, and they will manipulate you to get it. And that might be simply lying to you, or it might be that this charm that leads you to believe they're not so bad. I interviewed a triple killer named Gerald Uden for one of my books called Alice and Gerald, a homicidal love story. And in talking to Gerald, I went in knowing what was going to happen. I knew how he was going to go, and so I played along with it. At times he wanted to sing songs to me and recite poetry but then when we talk about the murders of his two adoptive sons and his wife, a veil comes down as if you were speaking to, and he just recite something that he probably had recited to cops for a long, long time, but he was a completely different person. That led me to other conclusions, but I have not. And this all started back in the 80s when I was a journalist and I interviewed Charles Manson at San Quentin in 1986. And I asked one question and he held the floor for 59 minutes doing his Charles Manson freak riff. And I never really asked another question, maybe a follow-up like, oh, really? Or are you sure? And I walked out of there saying I never want to lose control of an interview again like that. And so the whole process of doing true crime has, in one way, has made me better about interviewing killers, partly because of that. So I've done my own profiling in a way, nowhere as detailed, but
Sure.
It's fascinating. They do have common denominators.
Now, a lot of this has to do with something like dissociative identity disorder, right? Where they just don't view themselves, we say it becomes personal, but they're able to kind of separate themselves from the act. So my question is, do you think if this guy was just dissociated from norms, that is why he was able to pass polygraph tests?
There's that possibility. Back in those days, the profilers even brought this up, that they believed that a true psychopath was wired differently, so therefore could pass these tests that were tapping into your wires, right? We know now that's not true. We know now that a psychopath has no more chance of passing a lie detector test than you or I do.
Right.
It's about the questions. It's about the machine. It's about a lot of things, and they can do very little, some, but very little to swing it to either extreme. Well, that's not true. They could knowingly lie, and that would swing it to an extreme. But the truth serum baffles me too. Why he could pass the truth serum. I wish we could have had him to do interviews and studies further to be able to answer those questions. We just can't. I chalk the lie detector tests up to the questioner, the questions, the machines themselves, and then a certain ability on his part to be calm at a moment when somebody else might be getting more agitated.
Yeah, this is what I mean by dissociation. Yeah. I don't know if it's like a schizophrenic type of thing, or probably it's common traits in that. But yeah, that's that other guy who did that, not me. Ron, let me ask you this. To your knowledge and looking into this, behavioral science unit, because of the success of this, did they gain much currency from this moving forward?
Yes, I think so. I think there's some legitimacy in profiling. Like DNA, it's us out in the world that tend to give it more credence and more power than it really actually has. The fact is, DNA plays a role in less than 1% of violent crimes. It's just not used that much. But we started just trusting it without question. Within the last 10 years, we discovered that we were doing mixed DNA samples wrong. The forensic community just studied this and said, we've been doing this wrong. So in cases where you had mixed DNA, there are terrific questions. The same thing with profiling. It's an educated guess. It's not an absolute. And we tend to think that profilers go around with their guns and fly into wherever crime scenes and then maybe even slap the cuffs on the bad guy. That doesn't happen. These are not cops. They're not, they're just not. They are generally called in. They come in with a folder and a briefcase. They come to the morning meeting. They say, well, here's what I think. And then they take them to lunch and then put them back on the plane and they go. So profiling isn't what we think it is. It isn't what the media tells us it is. but it is a useful tool in narrowing that pool of suspects from 500,000, let's say, to 50 or even 50,000.
Right.
So it can save time. And as I said earlier, it wasn't embraced by the FBI before these guys did this. It wasn't embraced by the FBI after they did it, although the behavioral sciences unit was established. It has had an uphill climb with the front line of law enforcement. They are not generally, I think they find it interesting, but I don't believe any law enforcement is all in on any profile. They just take it as another tip.
Another tool in the toolbox.
That's exactly it.
Let me ask you another question now. As an author, a true crime, and you're also a novelist too. Yes. You know, fiction, nonfiction. Let's not forget that, and we'll get that address for your website if anybody wants to order any of Ron's books. There's plenty to choose from. As a researcher and an author, I'm not going to say easier because nothing about this is easier, but is it maybe a little less challenging to go back to a case that's 50 years old now where we know what we know rather than a case that's more contemporary, that there are still some loose ends and things may change, maybe they don't, but is it less challenging to go back? Because to be honest with you, I wasn't really familiar with this case, and I guarantee there's a whole lot of people who aren't, that should be, because of the success that came out of it, fairly or unfairly.
I think they all genres have their challenges. Fiction, nonfiction, they have their separate challenges. One isn't easier or harder than the other. The same thing I would say with historic versus ripped from the headlines crime writing. Ripped from the headlines crime writing, you always got a publisher saying hurry, 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 and you're saying we don't even have a verdict yet.
I can imagine.
And we don't have the perspective of time. Where with a historic case, we have the perspective of time, but what we don't have are witnesses anymore. I was lucky to have several from this case, but we don't have witnesses in this particular case. The county records of the Smulligan case disappeared completely. That they couldn't find them. I mean, it was like Mayberry. You're dealing with country deputies, or I don't know. I have no idea. Luckily, the FBI had the case file, and I got about I think it was about 15,000 pages of this case from the FBI. But the challenge, there's that challenge. The other challenge in this book was you're going back to a little town that's lived with this case for 50 years. And
I was just going to ask you about this. Go ahead.
For better or worse, it's the biggest thing that ever happened there.
Yeah.
It would have been nice if the biggest thing was that's where Abraham Lincoln was born. Unfortunately, it wasn't. This is it. So people don't want to talk about it. Family members of David Meyerhoffers are still alive and still living there. And so neighbors say, gee, they're weighing, I could talk to this guy, but then my name's going to be in the book, and that's going to piss off David Meyerhofer's brother over here, who's my next door neighbor. So no, I'm not going to talk to you. So those are the challenges. The challenge of telling an absolutely true story when it happened 50 years ago, it can present the biggest challenge. There's a lot of untrained crime writers have come up, and they want to colorize the thing. They want to tell a great story, and so we slip in a few things that just didn't happen. They didn't happen. I'm just going to say they did, because it makes a better story. Mm-hmm. So we're fighting that often when we're doing this kind of a story. And that's just, an element of the world we live in, that the line between truth and fiction gets blurred.
Well, in the age of the internet now, being first is more important than being measured.
Yes.
More than anything else. Before we bring George back in, Ron, your opinion, depending on what your definition of the word is, but do you think justice ultimately was served here?
No, and again, because answers were denied us. Did the killer get what was coming to him? Yes. But did we get what we deserved as society? Did Marietta Jaeger get what she deserved as the mother of a victim, or the family of Sandy Smolligan, or the other two boys that he admitted killing? I think that's an element of justice. Justice isn't just making sure the bad guy gets what's coming to him. It's also making sure that we get the answers that we deserve, that we want, that what we said might give us peace, and each of us has different answers. So no, justice wasn't served. I think in the end, David Meyerhofer took control, and he held control. He still holds control. There are questions you could ask tonight. Some you did. We will not be able to answer.
Correct.
And we deserve to be able to answer them.
Well, I think one of the disturbing parts, too, for me was that the family of the 13-year-old boy who was shot, family of the Boy Scout, had to wait even longer than the other two families for this to all come out. And, how they had to suffer with not having any kind of resolution for a longer period of time. So
none.
George, I'm going to bring you back in here as we got maybe 9 minutes or so, and take it over from here before we say goodnight to Ron.
Thank you, Ken. Ron, I want to touch on again, you're writing 19 books. I would imagine that you are still actively searching for the next topic that you're going to go under. But I'm wondering if you would go down the rabbit hole of pursuing where these particular serial killers profiling goes next. And what I mean by that is, as an example, you take David here and Meyerhoff with who he is and how they profiled him. There are literally hundreds of thousands of loners with former military background who have lived in the same area for many, many years and do not take that turn towards serial killer. It's interesting that they could put that profile together, but it's still very much a generalization. And again, behavioral science unit since the early 70s. Still haven't made advances. Science has made advances, but I don't think that the profiles, Ted Bundy did not have any type of a traumatic childhood growing up. He had a very, very normal childhood. I mean, I talked about this last week with Ann Burgess. My neighborhood, easily, where I grew up in New Jersey, could have manifested one of these or two of these out of that.
Sure.
It was right out of that whole playbook. But
you didn't happen to grow up in Camden, did you?
No.
Oh, okay.
Several New Jersey. But I'm what I'm trying to wrap my head around, what I'm trying to get to with you is there anything of interest to you to pursue more writing about how we can perfect this, how the FBI can perfect this? In your interviews with some of these killers, have you noticed any tendencies that would stand out that can be picked out from a crowd?
First of all, yes. I mean, I've noticed things like I say, the manipulation that they want something and they'll do anything to get it. Now that might mean a pack of cigarettes. It might mean a good portrayal in your book. It might be making you cry or just getting emotional control of you.
But that's anybody. That's
everybody does that with well, not everybody, but these people take things 10 steps farther. So the sociopath, you are related to sociopaths. I guarantee it. Most of us are. All of us are, I would say. And they exhibit some of those manipulative tendencies. They exhibit that need for control. They exhibit the need to be exalted. I don't believe it's us, you and me. But I believe we're related to them. They don't become killers necessarily. That again is taking it a few steps beyond that.
Right.
So, and I don't want to say there's just one path to becoming a psychopath. There are many reasons, and not always childhood related.
No. We know there's crimes that we see. There are crimes of passion. There are crimes of necessity. There's crimes of desperation. But these are just flat out cruel.
The serial killers are in a group all by themselves for a reason, and there's a psychological component. There's something driving them to do that. You could ask the question, what made Jerry? What made David Meyerhofer a serial killer? What made his killings serial?
Right.
He used a gun in The Boy on the Bridge. He stabbed and bludgeoned the Boy Scout.
Right.
He strangled Susie, and he suffocated accidentally Sandy Smulligan.
With the tape, yeah.
Two are pre-teenage or teenage boys. One's a 7-year-old girl.
No pattern.
One's an 18-year-old. There's no consistent thing. And I asked my friend Catherine Ramsland, who's one of the premier forensic psychology thinkers, that question. And she said it was his rage. His rage was the consistent thing. Okay, we have to explore a lot of there, but
yeah,
they're not always all blonde. They're not always all women. They're not always all 12-year-olds.
Right.
So it can be different things. And that, I think, is where the profiling, they've done tens of thousands of interviews now in the last 50 years. They have a database that's amazing that Teten and Mullany didn't have. They didn't even have a file cabinet. But I think it progresses by just enlarging its view of the criminal mind. And there are going to be other tools come along too that aren't psychological. The big one right now is forensic genealogy or genetic genealogy. And that's being used to solve a lot of crimes, mostly cold cases at this point. But we're going to continue to develop tools.
Yeah. Again, you take two identical individuals in their age, in their demographic, in their where they reside at, and find that the similarities are almost stunning. One is a serial killer, one is not, and they've still not been able to diagnose when they go over that cliff and decide to do something like that. And I know
people ask me that question all the time. Is it nature or is it nurture? Yeah. Is it something they're born with, or is it something that happens to them? And I say, I believe, as a journalist, not a forensic psychologist, not a doctor, nothing scientific. I believe it's both. I believe they are unfinished souls. They are people who are born with maybe some little flaw in their genetic makeup that then the atmosphere they're raised in, it's a kind of sympathetic rhythm with that flaw. And it just becomes, then they become the serial killers or the psychopaths, because their nurture has accentuated their nature.
Right. Here in the paranormal, we just blame it on demons.
Do that.
It works well on that.
And that we might know more about demons than we know about some psychology.
The book is Shadowman, an Elusive Psycho Killer, and the Birth of FBI Profiling. Once again, we'll also put the website. Guys, there's a whole bunch of information that's on there, so make sure you do check it out. RonFranscell.com. Cannot thank you enough for an interesting evening, and it's horrifying. Like I said, the scariest part of ghost hunting is the living, and you've just proven that tonight, sir.
It is. And I appreciate you having me on here and giving me your time. Thank you so much.
We appreciate it. Thank you.
Happy holidays to you.
Happy holidays to you, too. Yeah. That's important.
Yep. And that's it for us here, guys. Thank you so much for watching. Hang in there, Ron, for just a second, I'm sure. And we'll see you guys, our Patreon members, tomorrow night, 8 p.m. at Town Hall. And the rest of you next week, we're going to have a gathering of all of our show hosts for a Christmas special. Make sure you guys check it out. Until then, my name is George Lopez, Mr. Ken DaCosta. Thank you for watching. We'll see you next week.
I see her rolling up, Uber black Cadillac, high heel boots and a sexy body full of tats. Baby's bad, oh baby's hella bad. After her there ain't no coming back. Wanna take a run at that. I think she's feeling me, turn it up a few degrees. My imagination of her body gets the best of me. Oh gosh, she's such a tease, bitten lips, bruised knees.